Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Tamar, and today we're talking about Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. Originally debuting at the Cannes Film Festival earlier this year, Killers of the Flower Moon tells the harrowing true story of the Osage murders. In 1920s Oklahoma, these tragic events saw white outsiders come to indigenous Osage land and marry into their families to make a claim for their wealth generated by the oil produced on tribal land. Once in, these individuals would then systematically murder Osage families and take the money for themselves. The film stars an ensemble cast including Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, Lily Gladstone, and Jesse Plemons. Joining the show today is Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp, Nicolò Grasso, and Hilary White. Together we debate the effectiveness of the film both in perspective and craft to decide if the film really is one of the best of the year or an unfortunate miss for Scorsese. Remember, you can listen to ClapperCast on all major podcast platforms and find a video version of the show on YouTube. With that, sit back, relax, and enjoy our review of Killers of the Flower Moon.
You made a good choice coming back here. Osage are the finest, wealthiest, and most beautiful people on God's earth. They outsmarted everybody. They have the say who gets the oil. Son, I got a question. You like women?
That's my weakness.
Well, we mix these families together, and that estate money flows the right direction. It'll come to us.
Shomikasi. That's how you are.
I don't know what you said, but it must have been Indian for handsome devil.
Okay, and starting us off today, Nick, I know you're positive on the film, maybe the most positive. I don't quite know how some people here stand, but Nick, I'm going to turn over to you first. What were your thoughts on Killers of the Flower Moon?
I am very positive because I love this film. I went into it knowing about the story. Like, if I read the book a month ago prior to watching the film, really enjoyed it. I thought the structure of it, the way it focused first on the Osage, then it focused on the FBI, and then on the aftermath over the years, I found to be very compelling. And I was interested to see how Martin Scorsese was going to adapt it, especially given all the behind the scenes, drama in terms of like reshoots, and they had to like change the script when they were writing it and a lot of other things. And I have to say, I was blown away. I was almost blown away literally because this is the second film I've ever seen in IMAX, and it was a joy. One of the best things of being in Berlin when this movie was out was actually experiencing it on the big screen in IMAX, booming sound, massive image, and there's a lot of moments of just grace and moments of lyrical beauty in this film that I found to be incredibly touching. But most of all, I think this, together with Oppenheimer, they are two of the most important films to come out in American cinema in the past like couple of years, maybe even a few years. Probably hyperbole, but bear with me. Mainly because in America, but also in the world at large, like we're entering some troubled times. There's wars and conflicts and a lot of problems politically speaking, and there's just something incredibly scary about Killers of the Flower Moon. You're watching a genocide happening before your eyes. You're seeing it primarily from the point of view of the perpetrators, and they just don't feel anything. And it's so low key, and it's so just like matter of fact, whatever, just, people die in the least glamorous way, just bodies flopping to the ground, and that's it. And they're gone. And it just keeps repeating itself over and over again. And these men keep getting richer, and the Osage people are fewer and fewer. And it's just like I think the length is important because it sinks your like it just start you just start feeling this sinking feeling inside your chest. Like I was almost feeling sick at some points. I got to like 2 hours in, 2.5 hours in, when you're actually seeing the character of Molly, played by Lily Gladstone, was incredible in this film. She's physically getting sick because she's being poisoned, and I started feeling like sick and nauseated by the entire dynamic between her and Ernest. And there are some sequences in here, and we'll probably talk about them more in depth. But I found this to be deeply moving. Honestly, it hasn't happened in a while. I do get emotional like in front of movies, but I rarely get emotional like afterwards. And like movie ended, I was like, shit, wow, okay. Stayed for the end credits. I go to the bathroom. I almost broke down crying in the bathroom of the cinema. I just felt all of these emotions pouring out. I was deeply moved by it. And the cherry on top of it all was that the day after I was in Berlin, I went to the History Museum of the city, and they have this exhibit that's basically tracing back the steps from the fall of the Berlin Wall to the beginning, to like the 19th century of Germany. And there's a lot of tragedies, and of course, there's the Holocaust and all of this. And basically, you're just seeing the history of the country and the city of Berlin. And at the end of each part, it would just say, here's what could have happened. Like if some people did something different, if like the assassination attempt went okay, like all of these things, what would have happened? And it just shows you that true change needs to happen very, very early, because for some things, yes, Hitler could have been killed in the assassination attempt towards the end, but like most of the Jews and immigrants and the gays of Germany were already slaughtered in the things. And like seeing and reading these things, not even 24 hours after having left Killers of the Flower Moon, that just shows you how much it is important to just be human and fight for change, because you're seeing people and men that just don't do anything. Similar to Oppenheimer. Yeah, like you realize early on, maybe this is fucked up, just stop. And they were just, but science and other reasons. And like they created something horrible. And in this film, you're seeing something similar. Just like very early on, you figure out, oh, what they're doing is bad. And none of them stop. None of them try to think about it. They start marrying these women. They start having children, and they just don't. They're all about the money. He loves his money. That's what Ernest says like 7 times in the movie. He's like, "I love my money, sir." It's just, it's hideous. And I think like where it all ends up going with the final scene, which we'll definitely talk about, I think it's a perfect ending. Is it very long? Yes. Could it have been trimmed down a little bit? Maybe. I also don't know what you could have trimmed down, to be honest. Just incredible film. So I'm top 5 of the year. I don't know. One of my favorites. Yes.
I guess I can go next. I'm going to give a bit of a differing opinion, I guess, on this. Obviously, I'll say walked in very excited. Martin Scorsese. I was excited. I love The Irishman, right? I like a lot of his filmography. He's been doing pretty good this decade. So I was really hopeful for this. And I have to say, I was incredibly, not just underwhelmed, but then as I was thinking about the film, specifically as I was writing my review, I just got this really like icky feeling, to the point where I was like, I don't even know if I want a podcast about this film, to be honest. Like, yes, on a like technical level, it is a Martin Scorsese film. It's going to be really good. I think you have to applaud his depiction of the Osage people. There's a lot of work out there where he tried to have an authentic representation of their culture, and I think that works very well, and I have to applaud him for that. I think my biggest issues come in two ways. The biggest being the runtime. This is a film that in the first 20 minutes says exactly what the situation is. It gives you the entire depth of the entire feature, and then you watch that play out. And yes, there is a point where you could say it adds gravitas and it adds weight to sit there and just watch these horrors go over and over and over again. But in that, I think when you have this long of a runtime to consistently, in my opinion, and we don't need to get lost in this conversation, I want to also just acknowledge that maybe we're not the best like group to have fully this conversation. But I found that he consistently pushed the Osage perspective and the Osage people into the background and never gave them an agency, never gave them a focus, never gave them this part of their story. I don't think it's comparable to Oppenheimer, where there's all this outcry about how you didn't include the Japanese perspective. And I think it's very clear that film is going for a certain angle on that story. Killers of the Flower Moon attempts to be a holistic telling of the story. They attempt to include pieces of the Osage perspective and the Osage experience. And I get with Lily Gladstone and a phenomenal performance by her. There's a narrative reason. She's getting poisoned. She's getting sick. She literally gets reduced to dying in bed. I have no issues with that per se, but consistently there is a lack of agency and a lack of focus given to these people. And then at the end, you have this moment where I think it's very clear Scorsese wants to create a complex view of Ernest as a character, as he's done in a lot of his films. This is nothing new for Scorsese, to look at a character who's done absolutely horrendous things and then also try to give him a certain level of humanity and explore the complexity of what a human is, right? Because not a lot of people are just like purely evil. Not a lot of people are just purely good. You're trying to find that conversation. And I think it is really difficult to have this conversation at the end. And there's a very crucial scene in the courtroom where he makes a statement and he tries to reassure his love that he has for his wife. And I think that's something the film is trying to have a really honest moment there. But there is no sense of love. And this is a true story. I mean, these are real people. These are real deaths. These are real tragedies. I don't think this character is deserving. Number one, narratively, I don't think the film does anything to put this in there until this very end point. There's not a single scene of him feeling bad about what he's doing, as you mentioned, Nick. There's not a single scene of this character questioning if he's in the right or trying to make things right. In fact, even towards the end, it's reinforced time and time again that he's just this coward who's just trying to do whatever he needs to survive. I don't think it's worthy narratively. But then in the real world context, this guy married into this family, systematically murdered the family of his wife, poisoned his wife, almost killed his wife. I don't think this is a story that you can have that complexion in general. But even if you're going to have it, I think this film is so ineffective at having that conversation. I found it to be tedious. I found it to be boring. I don't think the ending works. Even past that, there's that whole weird ending bit we can talk about later. This is a film I wanted to like so badly, and I can acknowledge there are good parts to the filmmaking, the core filmmaking within this film, but narratively I think every single choice ends up feeling, for me, not only just like problematic and difficult to swallow, but just so uninteresting. Even focusing on like Ernest as the main character, I think he's quite frankly the worst choice here for the main character. I think you could have had him, and I get why, like I get the theology behind the choices this film makes. I just don't think it pays off, and I don't think it's effective. So I have a lot of issues with the film. Not to go really hard on it at the beginning here. I definitely want to have like a fun conversation, talk both the good and bad. But for me, I have a lot of troubles with this one.
I'll go next. This is going to be quite hard to follow up. Going into this, reading a lot. Well, first and foremost, actually, to give more backstory, this came out where I'm from at 4 showings a day for a week, and then just stopped. So I watched it this morning. I watched it at 8 o'clock. I was going to watch it last night at 8 p.m., but it was going to end at 1. So I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. So I went this morning. So it's quite fresh in my mind. Excuse me. So I do apologise if I can't sort of quote anything and give perfect examples, just because there's a lot here to think about. I was slightly worried going into this, knowing the sort of feedback people were giving about this, purposely about perspective, which I think is an interesting conversation to have. But the last 3 Scorsese movies, including this, The Irishman and Silence, are all films dealing with a level of morality and loyalty to religion, loyalty to family, loyalty to money. There's a certain identity to be had about these characters who fundamentally believe in something, right and wrong, but ultimately they believe in something. And I think it's an interesting sort of ideology to go into. Out of the 3 of them, this is the most difficult one to sort of assess, because it's about a very incredibly dark story. Not that The Irishman isn't, and not that the Silence isn't either, but this one, it touches on some very interesting American politics about identity and so on and so forth. I'll sort of push back against Carson a little bit, because I think this film does a particularly good job about perspective, in that I find that the whole point of this film is to take the voice away from those who need the voice. I think it's evidently clear, and I've always felt that Scorsese is a master of 4D chess. I don't think he's a filmmaker, very much like Stanley Kubrick and the likes of stuff like people like that, who don't purposely put something in here for any objective reason, for a joke or for a gag. I think everything here is devised on a purposeful level, and I think to give the audience the perspective of what Esther is, I think that's his name, isn't it? Esther, who is one of the most cynical,
Ernest?
vile. Is it Esther?
Isn't it Ernest?
Ernest,
Ernest.
sorry, Esther. Sorry. Anyway, yeah, Ernest. I think he's one of the most vile, poisonous, cynical characters put on screen, like Nick said, in the last few years. I think it's actually a conscious decision to put that character on screen as a protagonist and let the audience devise their opinion of him. Because I think this film, weirdly enough, when I finished watching it, there's one film that surprisingly came to my mind, and it was Once Upon a Time America by Sergio Leone. And it's a film, ironically enough, with Robert De Niro, and it's a film that propels itself as its main lead character to be a protagonist, but who is a victim of being a certain religion, a victim of being in Hell's Kitchen in New York, a victim of seeing his friends be killed in a robbery, a victim of going into drugs, a victim of getting money but no love, being a victim of being with someone's wanting a girlfriend, Jennifer Connelly, never really gaining it, and then at the end, it's revealed in 10 minutes that he is actually the antagonist all the way. He's a rapist. He's a foul human being, but the film purposefully directs it as a protagonist in order for the audience to have this sort of vulnerable immersion in that they're going on a story with someone. They don't know essentially who's going to be as vile as they are. Now, the difference between the two, I think this one is far more purposeful of showcasing this person to be vile, whereas I think Sergio Leone's film keeps it quite late. I don't think you could do that with this film. You cannot mix Ernest to be a character who is essentially vulnerable protagonist who is whimsically going through this. I think he's consciously a villain throughout. He's just he's consciously messing with his conscience in order to determine what sort of human being he's going to be. He's always going to be a bastard. He's always going to be a vile sort of human being. I think Scorsese holds that really well. I don't think anyone who has the touch to be able to direct this film other than Martin Scorsese as well. I think if you look at a lot of other filmmakers, would slightly struggle with this. And knowing that this was rewritten, which the story has been changed on that, it was Scorsese who rewrote this by Eric Roth. Eric Roth wrote Munich. A certain a certain writer to predispose of Tom Walker, which is Jesse Plemons' character, to be the main protagonist,
Tom
and change
White.
that to be a supporting character, and then to have Ernest as the main with Lily Gladstone's Molly. I think that's genius, but there's only really one way you could do that story, and it's the story you've got. Any other way, I think it becomes one of those really murky type of films where we're watching something here and we're watching an investigation, but we're not getting any sort of meat about this. But to be very quickly, because I know we're going to talk a lot about perspective and choice and stuff about this film, but in my opinion, I think taking the voice away consciously of characters who then, even in their final end, are not able to be giving it, I think is quite a poignant expose of an indictment of not only American politics, but the life and struggles of Native Americans within that time frame. I mean, it's consciously brought up multiple times within the film as well, where the FBI eventually get brought into it, not through eyes of the law, but through an economic value being paid to come down there. I think to be put in the perspective of the protagonist who's constantly trying to propel himself to be a hero or not to take plight in what his uncle's doing and essentially being a part of it. Showing sequences without him actually acting in it. With certain, the sheriff gets knocked out in his hotel room. We get it cut back 5 minutes later with him actually doing the act. It's a film that's constantly trying to wrestle with the fact that I'm not as guilty as everyone thinks he is, then as showing documentation that he is. And granted, it does ride a little bit about trying to then give him a little bit of freedom in the fact that I do love this woman. That noticeably the bomb sequence when the house blows up, when he's acting remorseful. I think when he's giving the insulin, and especially with that courtroom sequence. But I also think that's just even the most evil of people will still wrestle with a conscience, and I think it's a very difficult thing for an audience to sort of succumb to as well. There's a lot to talk about here, so I don't want to go on too long because I know I've battered around, but I do think it's always a conscious decision to showcase how murky this film is. I can understand when people come from the perspective of saying that, well, the voice here is really not the voice where it should be, but that's the plight of the characters themselves. That's the whole point of the film. There's one thing I want to touch on a bit later about certain imagery and stuff, which a certain actress has brought up later on, but because I just wanted to not dismantle that, but go into a little bit, but I'll leave for Hillary to go into it. But a very murky film, very difficult. I think only done by the person it was done by, and a film that I think takes hours and maybe a couple of weeks to really detox and let it drip through, because this is a film I don't want to watch again for a while, but I think I need to in order just to get that secondary touch. But very murky for me.
the way I approached the film was, I think, maybe a little bit different than um, the average person who went, because it wasn't necessarily about the cast. It wasn't necessarily Scorsese. It was that it was going to be this exposure of Native history that I'd say like the average American or just anybody in general is just completely unaware of. And there was a piece written in the Guardian that came out before the film was released, and I've heard it referenced in other materials reacted to the film, where I was really given the I was really given the impression that this was going to be more native centric than it turned out to be. At the same time, it was interesting seeing the marketing materials and particularly the trailer. I was able to outsmart that because if people don't remember, the way the trailer is constructed, I know there were several of them, but almost all of them revolved around, Ernest's voiceover and framing him as someone who is coming to terms with the evil that's happening. That seemed to be how it was being marketed. But while I was watching it, I thought, I know enough about how Scorsese makes things, and I know enough about the fact that DiCaprio's choices of characters are not they are not likable people for the most part. They're usually people who are very morally dubious, and the last several roles he's done have all kind of been in that wheelhouse. It would be kind of interesting to see him do something else. But the fact that I don't know, I made jokes with my friends. It's like, yeah, well, if you're going to marry somebody who's played by him, the marriage is not going to be good. But the trailer really framed it as if he was going to be an ally. And so at least I didn't fall for that. But going into it, I think I was just taken aback that it was almost entirely from the point of view of these perpetrators who were swindling and killing people for 3.5 hours. And I can't say that it means the same as to me as a white person as it does to pretty much anyone else who is in the minority in America coming in. I've read different takes on how people process the film, and they did not have a good time, or they did get something out of it that was helpful to them. But for me, I think I didn't and couldn't fully understand it until I went back and watched it again. And I think I was more open to accepting it for what it was, but it wasn't what I wanted. And I was able to come to terms with that. And kind of going off of what Jack is saying is that it is a film that you see and it does take a long time to process, at least for me, although usually it does take a long time for me to process anything. But I think this film in particular, because of its length and the amount of things that are crammed into it, there's just a lot to take in. Seeing it again actually helped me understand things a lot more um, narratively and emotionally. But the bottom line is, and I guess this is probably where the conversation will leap off of, is that it wasn't exactly what I wanted or what I hoped for, but it does it opens a door as far as like native storytelling or native history. But at the very end, it's kind of like, oh, it's only open a crack. It's really going to be up to what we see in the future to see whether that door gets completely pushed open or if it's just going to kind of stay there as far as like mainstream filmmaking.
Can I just jump in here? Because Hillary mentioned a really interesting thing there about perspective about the trailer. And I'm actually going to agree here because I think I don't want to sit here and be like, oh, I'm a Scorsese fanboy. But from the perspective of him as a filmmaker, and I've read multiple books by him. I went to Barnes and Noble a few years ago. I spent like $200 on just conversations, books, him just delving as a filmmaker. And it's interesting how he predisposes that idea of antagonist and protagonist. I think Wolf of Wall Street's a great example. Where you look at that trailer and you look at someone who is a flyboy, jet black hair, suits, tan, money, cocaine, strippers, everything. And then you watch that film and he's the bad guy. And I think the idea of that Scorsese, and granted, I think the trailer houses as well are not necessarily given by they have his input, but I think they're orchestrated ultimately by other people. That's not really any excuse, though. I still think he should have a perspective of what's crafted here, and I think he does. I think he knows full well that people, and this film deals a lot with essentially what white guilt is, which I think a lot of people, specifically in the US with this subject matter, don't want to acknowledge. They don't want to acknowledge crimes that are being committed by ancestors because it's nothing to do with me. But unfortunately, lineage and doing right for the community and doing right for wrong ultimately helps that burden, helps soothe those incidents. We're having this issue now in the UK on tenfold. We have caused multiple issues within our history we're having to deal with. If we don't deal with it, we're going to cause other issues in other people, other communities. So it's very much a 2020 issue, but nevertheless, chickens always come home to roost. I think that's the saying anyway. But from my perspective, I think it's somewhat genius. And granted, I don't want to be taken out of context here because this film is playing with lives. It's playing with real people. It's playing with a real community. And I do want to just to the viewers here and to the listeners is that you have to be so careful in trying to play a blinder on audiences about perspective here because you're touching on some real stuff. It's like the Sharon Stone, Jesus Christ. I'm going to say Sharon Matthews, but if anyone knows about England, that's a completely different thing. Sharon Tate, yeah. I'm all over the place. I've had a Diet Pepsi. But I do think that you've got to be very careful about juxtaposing real life things in cinema now because this takes on a whole lot of meaning. And I think Watchmen, the Damien Lindelof thing with the Tulsa riots, I think that's also a very similar issue where you're talking about real things that happened. Nobody wants to talk about. It's been forgotten in time for communities who don't give a shit because they're not educated on it. And unfortunately, once that problem hits, they'll just turn around and say, well, why do we need to care about it? Unfortunately, it's a part of your history. Educate oneself, understand it, and it'll never happen again. Granted, it's not always the case that it works, unfortunately, but just to get back to the point of the trailer, I think it's interesting how he predisposes that Leonardo DiCaprio character, not necessarily as a hero, like Hillary said, but someone that you can find I have to be careful how I say this, you can find a motive core with, that you can understand that someone is struggling with the idea of morality about what they're doing. However, I think what Scorsese does is he knows that this film is predominantly going to be sold to a major white audience, which most of cinema viewers are with the demographic of the in the US, the US Hispanic, and then the multiple different types of. Also, you've got African Americans as well. Sorry, but we're talking about demographics. What this film's specifically about. He knows a lot of people are going to go here who are a certain type of demographic. I think it's quite interesting to lure these people in, otherwise not telling them essentially this person's a bad person. Reel them in, get them on the seats, take them 20 minutes into the film, drop DiCaprio's character in, let him be whimsical, let him essentially fall in love with this woman, and then take the rug between the legs and be like, this is a perspective now, and indulge them that way. The issue with that is for a 3.5 hour film, which is a very dark film, you're going to struggle getting a major amount of audiences in to try and utilize that trick. I think he does succeed, and I also think that I've had this discussion on this podcast before about with film and cinema taking recent issues in modern history and trying to sort of explore them because a lot of people aren't ready for it. I think it's time now that the perspective of this has to be brought to people if they like it or not. And one way of doing that is grappling them in by a leading actor, not necessarily give the game away about perspective, protagonist, antagonist. Ultimately, the uproar about the actual issues ultimately outweighed the effect in the film itself because of the fury in the media. But get them on the seats and then slowly but surely educate them and showcase what oppression, what slaughter, what systemic genocide looks like, and that's what this is. And I think it's an interesting perspective to take, but it's one hell of a risk. And also, as well, I think that predominantly when we go to watch cinema, and this is just a theory, please chime in after this, but I think that anyone who watches a film, the perspective, or at least the subconscious, is that lead characters are protagonists. Lead characters are protagonists. Lead character protagonist all the way through cinema. It's very rarely that we'll get like sort of a twist or a perspective, and if that's built within the film anyway. But there's a subconscious element of an audience accepting that whoever we see on screen, Leonardo DiCaprio, we go into it's a film about him. Oh, he's the protagonist. That's the way to draw them in, and then educate, explain, and showcase terror from the perspective of someone who looks like you, and understand that this happened, and this is an issue that plagued a generation, ultimately still plagues these people today. I think that's the idea going forward. And again, I'm not. This is just me theorizing here, but that's the way I would do it. But just to go back to the point here, I do think it's a really difficult film to do that. I think, and granted, if someone turned around here today and went, "I actually don't agree with that. I don't think that's the perspective I thought," I would not argue against you. That's a feeling I get. Dangerous as it is, I think that's a perspective to force people who to subliminally and subconsciously identify if that's color or creed with people and think, "Oh, these must be the protagonists," and actually take away that robe in front of them, that cloth, and be like, "No, these people are actually the villain, and what we're going to watch here is them terrorizing a community." I think that's the idea here. Alas, perspective, if it's done correctly for whoever you are, Hillary, Nick, you, Carson, I think that's up to the individual. For me, I think it works, but I think I know what Scorsese is at least trying to do here. If not, I do think it really does come across at like, right, we don't have enough firepower to give the Native American story enough pump. So let's go and look at these white characters. I do think it can come across like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, go Carson. I can go after.
Honestly, like, I don't hate that idea, and like I see what you guys are talking about. But watching this film, the reaction from my theater consistently, and I assume, I mean, it's part of Scorsese's style, right? But like, I think especially to engage audiences, general audiences, for 3.5 hours, like it constantly then with every time Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio are talking is a comedic scene with laughs, right? Like I think there's like, I get what you are saying, but I don't see the actual execution here being supportive of that. I feel like this is a film lacking, and it's weird to say because it's like obviously deeply disturbing. It's obviously like trauma on screen. You're seeing these real life, disgusting, vile acts of racism and murder, and it's awful. But it never feels like it allows its characters to have the venom within their performances, within their scenes, within their dialogue that I feel like it really should have had. And again, I think so much of this comes from him wanting to have this complex view of these characters by the end. But like, I don't know. I don't think it's such a non-starter for me to see these characters, and maybe it's just a me problem, right? But I think it's such a non-starter to set these up, to be very explicit and open about what these characters are doing, and then try to like, oh, but actually they're kind of entertaining also. Like they're kind of silly and goofy, and as they're talking about like going to prison, it's all kind of funny also. And then also there's this thing about love. Like I get that at the core, this film could have been exactly what you're talking about, Jack, and I value that. I just feel like it's not done here. I feel like it's, and that's where it just, I have a problem with it, is I feel like consistently it's undercutting itself and it's never allowing itself to be that.
Oh, interesting. I have to point something out, because like what Carson is talking about, the reaction among the audience that Carson was with, I find like that, I want to put my finger on that, because that would probably have colored my reaction to the film too if the audience I had been with had reacted that way. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. The two times that I saw it, the only time that people laughed was, oh, who was that asshole? Oh, the guy with the adopted kids who goes and talks with the guy, and he's just like, so say like
No, Louis
I
cancelled
adopt
me.
these kids
Yeah.
and like if they die, I get their head rights. And then just cuts to the other guy, and the guy's like, I'm not gonna let you do that because it sounds like you're gonna adopt these kids and then murder them. That was the only time that there was a laugh in the audience, the two times I saw it, because it was just like, this asshole. Like they're laughing at him, like it's so flagrantly evil. It's like you can't handle it. You're like, this is a joke, right? But you know it isn't. But I did hear about people laughing when the KKK showed up, or certain things that were happening, like with Carson mentioning these conversations with between the characters. To me, it was not funny. To the audience I saw it with, it isn't funny. But if I had been an audience where there was a lot of white people laughing at this, I probably would have had a lot more to chew on.
See, I think that's interesting because my audience, I had a sold out, the screening I went to, it was sold out with people. And like, they were like every piece of dialogue laughing at like the comedy, the style,
Oh
the
my
wit, like,
God.
That's
and it
fucked
was
up.
very disturbing to me,
That's
right? Because it's
unacceptable.
not funny. And that was where I felt there was a disconnect because I'm like, oh, this isn't funny. I'm not vibing with this movie how everyone else seemingly is in the audience.
Mhm.
I don't know if it was, I don't know, but for me, like, it just wasn't working. But for my audience, they were loving it. I think they got that it was horrifying. I don't think they were like confused and like, oh, we stand Ernest. But like, I don't know, it
Oh,
wasn't,
Jesus.
I
They have the
just felt like it
t-shirt
did
on
not
there.
land.
I have to say,
I
like,
find,
and it might just be me because I've heard so many negative experiences in theaters, especially like post COVID, and that's like almost an entirely different podcast where we could talk about theater etiquette and all that sort of stuff, or like how people react to things inappropriately. And for me, I feel very, very spoiled. I mean, I don't can't say I live like in a tiny town or anything like that. There is a theater in town, but like a lot of the stuff that people complain about, it actually just doesn't happen here. I'm not entirely sure why. I mean, even if there's teenagers, or I mean, with kids, it's totally different. Like there will be kids running around, but yeah, that just hasn't happened. And so it's very eye opening for me. I need to get this perspective where it's like you could go into a multiplex and people are, laughing at things that are just absolutely absurd.
I don't want to sound like the Scorsese Scorsese defender here, but I do think this is and I'll discuss the specifics because they're really interesting examples. But this is a motif of Martin Scorsese. This is a motif of you think I'm funny? Funny how Joe Pesci. I think he does it multiple times in Goodfellas, Casino. I think this is just motifs in his cinema, but they're always predisposed in a certain example. So you think I'm funny? I think that thing with Ray Liotta is that it's these three vile creatures, these gangsters who again were projected as protagonists and undoubtedly antagonist evil people. That sequence takes the steam out of things. It's tried to use as a comedic value, and then what happens after? Violence. He shoots the kid, which is Michael Imperole, Sopranos fame, shoots him to death. In Casino, Joe Pesci gets shot, pushed down into a hole, and stuff like that, and it's like a comedic and it falls down like that, like a rag doll, and then he's buried essentially alive with his brother in a ditch in Las Vegas. I think Taxi Driver has these moments as well. I think Mean Streets is a perfect example. Not necessarily so much in Silence, but The Irishman with Ray. God, I can't remember his name. Everyone loves Raymond. But did you do it? Did you do it? Did you actually did you do it? He's like, no, but you can tell me you did it. He's like, nah, yeah, like it's all whimsical, but really it's a guy who just almost killed someone. I think this is projection that he predisposes on his audience in that, like, oh, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Yeah. This is real. This is about murder. And I think it's interesting how he does that. I do think it's a sense of his style as, and this is going to be terrible, as an older gentleman. I don't think it works so much now because of the context of what he's trying to showcase behind it. Especially in this, I do think that within Goodfellas, which is slightly comedic in nature, Casino, slightly comedic in nature, Wolf of Wall Street's another one, The Irishman, it's got bits in it. This isn't. And I think it's the one thing, and I will agree with both of you, I think that's a slightly narrow-minded approach of what he tried to achieve here, because the the context of each scenario that occurs is so gripping in a way that it's like flashing over. They take the guy in the white suit out, bang, shoot him in the head, throw him in a ditch. It's like it's montage-esque in villainy, where it's not given any precedent to this, and it takes it away straight away, almost like it's trying to defend itself and hide these crimes internally. And this meta display of, well, it's trying not to show the audience, oh, we're not bad people, we're still good people. You didn't really see that. Very small snippets. I always think it's conscious that he's trying to achieve there, but nevertheless, the thing that Hillary mentioned in that scene itself, there was two people in the cinema, me and someone else, and they sort of chuckled at it, and I was like, do you not that like it's like I can understand people find humor in certain ways where they find it diffusing. I think Scorsese does that, but within the context of this specific type of film, knowing you are going to get much displeasure about certain communities, certain audiences being sort of predatory towards it, being like, this is going to be quite difficult to project onto audiences. That to me is the one thing I'm slightly not disappointed, but I think it goes slightly ajar there, especially that sequence of, well, will I get the money and then I'll kill them. He's like dead face about a deadpan. Or when he's in the courtroom and he says like, "Have you ever been?" John Lithgow goes, "Have you ever been back then?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Have you ever been back there?" He's like, "Yeah, I've gone there, because you can hide and drink there." You killed an innocent woman there. You murdered her. You shot her in the head with her husband, and you've done it for economic reasons. And it's done in like just a whimsical nature. I think the idea is to project a sort of nonsensical, whimsical, ignorant approach. Does it work? I think it's probably the worst example out of his filmography here, in my opinion. I just think it's like, oof, maybe that can be seen tone deaf, especially in the courtroom sequence where 5 minutes later we get the monologue from DiCaprio. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to disagree there, but it is perhaps a tone too far within this context of this film, in my opinion, anyway.
Interesting. Yeah, I had a very I had a good theater experience. I have to say, it wasn't particularly full. I saw it at like 2 p.m., so in a busy city, people have other things to do. But I did have like a couple of guys. I don't know, they were like maybe 30 years old. I don't know, just sitting behind me, and they chuckled a lot throughout the movie. But it was always in those like more Scorsese comedic, let's say, moments. But while I didn't laugh during the film, I did kind of find definitely absurdity in what you're witnessing. It's more like disbelief. That's the main like. I find the film to be incredibly scary because of just how matter of fact everything is, especially coming from the book, which is framed as a mystery. Like, you know that Ernest and William Hale are the ones, and all the other white men are the ones killing the Osage people. You don't figure that out until like in the second half of the book, once you actually get to court. Like it's played like a proper mystery, where it's like, oh shit, people are dying, and Tom White comes in, he starts investigating, and the FBI starts putting tracers and starts eavesdropping on conversations on phones, like all of that stuff. So the fact that the movie opens up and they do everything except literally saying we're going to kill these people, it just takes you back. And I like knowing the story. That's what really shook me. It's like, oh, it's already happening. Like, DiCaprio came in and it was already happening. And then the cycle just keeps perpetuating itself and it just keeps going and going. And the fact that you don't feel it in that heavy of a sense early on, but it just starts like sinking into you, I think that's the true horror of it. And that's kind of the power of it for me. Instead of it being framed in a different way. And even in terms of how little agency we can say the Osage have, that's just the brutal reality of the story. Like, even reading what they did, and you kind of see it in the movie, they're like, what can we do? That's one thing I didn't like about the trailers. I think like the only one I saw was like the second trailer, I believe, which was like more action packed with the snappy music and very Scorsese, you could say. And the way that it's framed in the film, it almost looks like the Osage people are just taking arms and going to town, like shooting people. The way it's like edited together, I was like, I'm curious to see that movie now. And then of course it was completely different. But that's unfortunately what happened with them. And I do actually, I especially after having heard a lot of criticisms about the portrayal of the Osage, I actually think I got more of them than I expected. Which is probably very different from like what you said, Hillary, and from what other reviewers said. It was like there's a lot of respect and understanding of these people, but more so respect, even on a spiritual level. I think everything that about like the portrayal of the afterlife, when like Molly's mother passes away, I thought that moment made me tear up. Honestly, it was just so beautiful of her just walking into her own version of the afterlife. It's not the Judeo-Christian idea of heaven, it's the Osage people's version of it. It was lovely, and everything with the owl, this symbol of death, just appearing and using an actual owl was refreshing instead of it being CGI. Like, all of those elements I thought were very powerful. And you see the frustration building up within these people, and then they go to Washington after a lot of trouble and distress, and like actually like struggling with getting money. And I think that whole like economic angle as well, with how they were exploited, is disturbing. um but yeah, no, I think it is very Scorsese what he does with having an evil man as the protagonist. But I think most important of all is the fact that it gives him, I don't want to say a conscience, I don't even know if that's if it really gives him a conscience per se, but it shows that he had, thoughts. He was a stupid evil man, but he had thoughts, he had ideas, he had his own version of love, because he keeps saying like, I love my wife, but it's like, actions are one thing, words are another, and the way that you love her so much, you're willingly poisoning her. And the fact that he keeps repeating it, and then you have like the moments of them in the field and the moment in the courtroom, it's like, you're saying some things, but what you're doing is completely different. And that's kind of something that's just a constant throughout the film. And and I think that's the most important thing, is that you keep seeing this man who at any moment could have said stop. He could have said, I love my wife, and I'm not gonna I'm not gonna like, it's absurd. That's like, it's like, just why are you killing her? Why are you willingly killing her? I think there's another chilling moment where they announce, like, he and his wife announce that, oh, we're pregnant again, we're having another child, and there's De Niro's face that just like looks at, it's like a stare of death. It's like, dumb motherfucker, like, you have to kill her. Why are you having another child with her? Which is so, just that got to me so hard watching. I was like, Jesus Christ, like, every step of the way he could have stopped. He could have, I mean, could he have tried stopping the others? It was too stupid for that. Just way too stupid, too much of a coward. They probably would have killed him, whatever. But he could have stopped at least killing his own wife. And I think the fact that we focus on this microcosm of the greater tragedy, it just shows you that something like that went on in every single one of these houses. No one was forced to do anything. They all did this out of their own free will. And I think it culminates in the final moment between him and Molly, when they're kind of like, when she completely abandons him. It's just like, you keep saying those things. You keep pretending that you actually love this woman, and you say it to her face, and you lie straight to her face about not actually trying to kill her and poison her for money. I think, like, once I got to that point, it's like, I would be shocked if anyone leaves this movie thinking Scorsese, like, I don't want to say not admires, but like, oh well, it was a conflicted man. It's like, no, it was evil. He did it for evil purposes. That's something that, like, I don't know. I found it to be very, yeah, a lot. I live you
I
saying
genuinely
that.
believe Scorsese thinks that he's a complex figure, though. I mean, I think Scorsese obviously thinks he's evil. I genuinely think Scorsese thinks, like, oh, there's some complexity within Ernest as far as, like, that.
More so human than complex, because people have conflicting feelings. Like, no one's just black and white, outside of maybe William Hale in the way he's presenting the movie. But even then, he's like, oh, he's just beloved by everyone, a man of the people, of the community, of the Osage, and this the main culprit of it all. Is just like, you're a sick bastard, like, willingly, like, giving booze to the Molly's sister who's an alcoholic, and
Sure.
doing all these shady things, like, constantly in the foreground, like, and it's not telegraphed, and there's not a lot of attention on it, but there's all of these things are constantly happening throughout the film, or just like this slow literal and metaphorical poisoning. And I think it's important. I think the film is way more effective by showing Ernest like that than if he were just, I don't know, if he were played like Daniel Day-Lewis in Gangs of New York. He's grand, he's evil, look at him, haha. No, because that's not how people are. It made me think of a lot of other, like, not similar stories per se, but like other stories of abuse, of just people that I kind of trusted. I was like, oh, it's just kind of dumb. But then you're like, wow, how could you actually do something like that? Like, people who had the choice to do something good on a way smaller scale and less lethal, of course, but be like, why the fuck did you do that?
On that note,
I
don't know.
that's
Sorry,
hard.
Laura.
That's a hard question to answer. And I mean, and that's
No.
actually something that personally, I mean, personally for me was actually really hard to watch. Was just the constant scenes of like, I love you, I
Mm.
love you, I love you. And he means it. That's what actually got to me the most and got to me the most. Their relationship is very, very strange, especially the second time around. You don't know why. Why does she love him? Why does she love him? I can't find an answer to that. And why does he love her? I
Hmm.
can't completely come up with an answer for that either. And the abuse in that relationship, as far as, the lying, is just, it's absolutely devastating. And in a way, it did make me think, weeks after seeing this, is that Ernest as a character is very interesting, because if he just hadn't been told to do anything he wouldn't have. I think that's what's so scary and overwhelming and frustrating for me as a viewer. When I left the theater for the first time, I ended up in the hallway, and I was just I was like kind of doubled over. And I mean, it was just like four of us, there was four people, and I was just like, how stupid was he? How stupid? Could he read? I don't know if he can read. I don't know if he felt anything. I couldn't, there was just like there was a lot of emotions. And of course there was the argument. And I was just like, yes, I know who's playing him. That's the reason why we get hooked into this stuff in the first place, is that, we feel a sense of familiarity with the actor. We know what he can do. So we're able to go on a journey with him. But it's just like, but this character in particular, divorced from the performance, you can't figure out where he's coming from. But it did become more apparent to me the second time I saw it, is that a lot of his anger and a lot of his evil and a lot of his frustration comes in having to participate, even though there's no incentive for him to really do it. He doesn't really have to. He's somebody who's like, he's just told to do something and he does it, or he's just told something and he believes it. And I realized it took a while that it's so frustrating for anyone to watch, because that exists in all of us. It's a very, very human thing. If you have someone order you to do something, in a lot of contexts, we actually do it. We can be told to kill someone or hurt someone in certain situations, and we'll do it. It's incredibly uncomfortable. And Ernest is an embodiment of that, and it's incredibly alarming to watch.
The tragedy with Ernest is the first 10 minutes when he arrives in town, right? And his uncle sits him down and he tells him about the war, and he was a cook. Ernest is a character who wants purpose, like many men, like many people, but people who come back from the war, who he saw loads of people die, saw loads of injuries, but he never killed anyone, never really made a dent into that war effort. But he was a cook, and his uncle reaffirms it and says, "Well, you cook for the boys who won the war." He's a man of tragedy who needs purpose, and the tragedy of that is that his uncle gives him that purpose, and he torments him. You can read. I think he torments him into being this absolute evil bastard in the idea of economic purpose of needing more money. If Ernest would have met anyone else that day, anyone else, he could have been an orderly, could have been to be a doctor. That's the tragedy of Ernest, in that he could have had a purpose, but he was ratified by his uncle for greed. But also, again, the issue about Scorsese as a character has to give him a conscience, because once you give someone a conscience, then they have the choice of actually choosing whether or not to do something. The fact that Ernest has a conscience, yet still remains to choose to poison his wife and do these things, reaffirm how much of an evil bastard he is. There's a whole point there, is that his uncle, Robert De Niro's character, isn't given a conscience in the film. He does these acts in spiteful manners, giving the alcohol. There's never the perspective that he has the other choice. It's one note with him. So the audience automatically see that as him as an evil man. There's no redeeming quality. Once you give Ernest a conscience in the film, yet he still chooses to remain loyal to that man and do horrible things, it makes it even worse, because he had the choice not to do it. That's the most heartbreaking about this, is that he could have stopped killing his wife. He could have stopped his wife's sister from dying. He could have stopped this. And at the end, he even chooses not to do it. He even chooses not to testify because his uncle ultimately sort of manipulates him once again. It's only until that his child dies, which is allegedly natural cause as well, not even an aspect of what he's done, is the one that breaks him, which I think is another really interesting character motif as well. But yeah, it's very interesting, that aspect. Once you can get over that, because it's difficult to assess, like Hillary said, we can't really identify why these people do what they do, because it's so far framed from our reality that it's very difficult to justify their actions. So I can't in my head justify why he does the things he does. I wouldn't do that. But I can see the evil manipulation that comes behind it. And I think that's what highlights Robert De Niro, and I think he will win supporting actor for this. I just think I've never seen Cape Fear 2. I don't want to. This motherfucker was Max Caddy. It was absolutely frightening. I can see why people get upset by the Ernest character, because we predispose him as the protagonist. But that man in the background, who at that meal, we didn't want to say anything, but we're pregnant, we're having a baby, and he just looks like, what? He doesn't drop at
Mhm.
the christening. I wouldn't know that the religious manner that perhaps that community would call it, but just for the purpose of the christening, he's a look of absolute dread, knowing there's one more to get rid of. It's not about that he has a nephew or anything like that. It's there's one more to get rid of. That's utterly frightening. I think a lot of people sort of look at the idea of Ernest as this scapegoat in that it's difficult to highlight that, and I think it is because of how those emotions work but it is definitely then put on Robert De Niro's character to be the villain. But again, once you put conscience in a character like Ernest, then you've got to then sort of rectify the fact that the audience then are going to find that, well, if you're giving him a heart, why is he doing these things? But again, he's like Hillary said, this man's so stupid, like he's so manipulative because he's just so stupid. But I think it comes to the power of the fact that he's just so vulnerable. That's not to in any way to negate the fact of his crimes that he's made. He's a horrible human being, but it's interesting
Yeah.
to identify his emotional torment. But again, I think that's what makes the ending even more heartbreaking. That literally at the end, he lies in front of his wife. Just one more. I mean, you can. It depends on what perspective you look at it. But when he says like, "Did your uncle tell you about to marry this woman, your wife?" He's like, "No, I fell in love with her. Please, please." Like it's even in that moment, it's like heartbreaking to watch because he's lying because he's manipulated himself to think that. You know, he's manipulated himself to believe that those thoughts and feelings. And again, I think that's the power of the film. I do understand though that if you're going to use him as a protagonist, people are going to identify in that, and that's where the struggle comes in because are people going to realize that this man is evil? This man chose the wrong decisions. I think you get in murky waters. That's what the film should have been called. To be fair, but I think Robert De Niro is excellent. There's a difference between character perspective about giving a character conscience and giving character no conscience. The two different levels of performance in De Niro and DiCaprio, in the fact that one is straight laced and you get this horrific sentiment of evil, and then if you get another evil character who justifies his own merits, his own crimes, but you give him a conscience, and look how different that is for an audience on perspective. How different it is for you to accept the fact that he does certain things. I think that's the genius of the writing. I think it's the fact of you know levels of depth to give a character. I think there's so much here to look at in that respect. Granted, then you have to look at Lily Gladstone's character. That's the one where we get slightly disappointing returns again, but she's an actress with who is reactionary in this film. It's a constant reaction. She goes to Washington out of reaction, desperation, knowing it might kill her. It's a constant reaction, but ultimately, that's what the Osage community had to deal with, was a reaction. It was never a reaffirmation or an attack. They weren't able to do that. And also, no one's really noticed this in the film, and I think it's one of these subconscious elements is that this film starts with what essentially are three main white characters. You've got DiCaprio, his brother, not main characters, but essentially you have three white characters. DiCaprio, his brother, and his uncle. Now, as soon as these people start killing people, it shifts. Osage characters' voices deplete. They're off screen less. The voices don't. There's no one there. It gets slow and slow until you get to the half point where you've got Lily Gladstone, and that's it. Now, I can understand when someone says the perspective of that is, well, there's not enough conversation, there's not enough perspective of the Osage, but I can't help but think that's the point of the film. The point of the film is to strip these people back to the bare bones as they were and see people who made these crimes and see them. Because I don't know if anyone was aware at the press conference in Cannes, but Scorsese made a really interesting comment. This is not a who done it, this is a who didn't do it. This is a mass conspiracy in this town. If you read about it, like Nick has in the book, there are not 3 or 4 people. There are hundreds of people who was conspirators to get this money. It was the town who was against it, and the town then ramifies or ultimately glues itself to Robert De Niro's character in order to maximize get the dance studio, the banks, stuff like that. They were all in it. So the fact that they then take over and the Osage voice then depletes from the film, it's undoubtedly a conscious element to explain to the audience that these are what the characters get, and then you get the Osage resurgence in the last quarter. And even then, there's no power to it. They have no voice. It is constructed on a purposeful element. But then again, I can completely understand a perspective of an audience stating that wasn't enough for them. I can understand that. But for me, with this film, I think it's consciously crafted to to showcase that ideology. If it works for you, it doesn't. I can understand if it doesn't. But for me, I felt it held so much power because one voice gets eradicated even on screen. I've not just a literal, but not sort of like a psychological, but a literal element. There's no hiding here. The vulnerability, the venom this film holds is frightening. Like I said earlier, like we have murder in here where it's like, there you go, we cut away, and you think like, oh, they didn't really give him any power. That was it. They were just like suicide. That was it. They were thrown away. They were ragdolls of society where people were like, someone was shot and a baby went missing, like we showed in the opening, or suicide, no investigation. That's what happened. That's perspective, and it's showcased through the idea of through its cinema. I think it's genius. You want to know more, but the film moves on so quick. You can't identify it. We don't really get to see what happened. We don't really get to see names, but we know people are killed. It's exactly what happened within the community. The thing moved on. 30 to 60 deaths. The 30 have gone. More have been missing. I think there's 30 documented murders, and then there's about 100 other people documented. I think that's the actual venom of this film, is that even us as an audience can't really perceive the momentum of people just stricken away, just taken away, murdered, as if it's just nothing. Because it wasn't for them. It was just nothing for these people. Nobody gave a shit. Nobody investigated anything. Again, I think that's really where the fire of this film is. But once again, to reiterate, I can completely understand perspective there is quite demeaning. I can understand why people would think you're actually not showcasing that this terror. It's a very drastic, disciplined, albeit controversial look to do this story. I think perhaps Scorsese 10 years ago may have taken this different direction. I think 20 years ago it had taken a direction. I think the one interesting one who I think, not to jump the gun here, I think Michael Mann would have done an interesting job of this, especially Last of the Mohicans, Michael Mann, or Heat, about that idea of perspective and showcasing things. Alas, I think Scorsese is a brilliant 4D chess player here to sort of showcase that ramifications.
One thing I want to insert here that's very, very important. I mean, I know people are listening to this; they're either watching a video or listening to their headphones, and it's four white voices coming out of a box. I mean, the native perspective is not here, but I feel very, very compelled to point out that this is still happening. This is not anything new for native populations. There's still a lot of people who are being murdered under different circumstances, and there's no investigation. There's people who go missing, no investigations. There was a much higher death rate during COVID because reservations did not get the same help. Not as much, looking into that or investigations or care unless it was, funded by people who are willing to donate money in order for those people to be more protected. So one of the things to keep in mind, especially like from a completely different point of view from the way that we see this historically, is that this is still happening. And I would be very, very interested in moving the conversation more toward Molly, what we can find about, or what we can find in her character and how we can talk about her character, because it's actually really difficult. Lily Gladstone had a very, very difficult job, and her performance, to me, like the thought that kept coming back to me is that her performance was like a stone, because she's very, very resilient and still, and things are just kind of running over her, and kind of wearing her down, but she still manages to somehow survive all of this. Her resilience is great. It sucks that someone like that has to be resilient, because if you talk to people who've been through a lot, they're tired of being told that they're strong. They would just wish that things would be a little bit easier for them. And I also thought about, there's a YouTube essay that people should look up. It's by a YouTuber called Thomas Flight. It's called In Praise of Subtle Performance. And Gladstone does a masterclass in that. She's like, it's more reactive acting. It's more subtle. It's quiet. It's very, very complex, but it's very easy to be overshadowed, because very often we go to the film to see things that are emotive, open, transparent, um, yelling, crying, confrontational, saying the things that we wish we could say in real life. And Lily Gladstone doesn't do that, but she still is so incredibly moving while doing very, very little. And there are some scenes that are easy to forget that are strictly from her point of view and have her voiceover. where she's looking at all these white people. That's another thing that I have to bring up about this movie. And I know I'm not the only person who saw that, but there was a purposeful visual element to this film where no matter how familiar you were with the faces in this film, every white person looks evil and freakish and ugly. Like it really, really got to me. Both times I watched it, I'm like, this has to be on purpose, especially when it shows things from her point of view. All these white people crammed into her house, all these white people watching her while she's getting married, while she's having her children and having celebrations. It's very, very, it's quiet, but it's there. And it's very easy for that to get lost in the mix. And I was really curious about how people process that, especially because her performance is underneath everything, kind of like I said, like a stone. It's like a stone at the bottom of a river. But I don't know. I'm just really curious about what the rest of you thought about her
I
performance in
think
this.
I think that sequence is what I brought up earlier about personifying the idea that when it's definitely the christening when she's holding a baby and she looks around and she does the voiceover and she just sees white faces. And I think it's on all the white faces looking back at her, and she knows that her mother should be there, her sister should be there, and her family should be there, and they're not because they're being murdered by these people. Someone in that crowd is killing them. I think that perspective, her face just go. It should be such a euphoric moment. She's had a child, and she's smiling, and she looks up. There's a voiceover, and her face like crumbles on screen. Like that's devastating to me. And I think everybody's been there, where you're in a moment of just euphoria, and then you have that moment of realization, and you get floated back down to earth. But it's not by that. You get your legs, and it's bang, you brought down. And she looks around, and she knows that one of those people, and the camera lingers on De Niro just a little bit too much. But again, taking the face away from the films, taking the culture away, stripping it out slowly but surely, and that moment sort of defining. Talking about the perspective of this being a reality as well. This is not to digress here, but I think it's quite important to bring up. I'm from the UK here. Nick's from Italy, so our perspective of this is a little bit different to yourself, Hillary, and Carson, I presume. So my wife is American, and my wife used to live in Montana for about 5 years. So I visited that part of the world quite a few times. I've stayed there for 3 months at a time, almost twice a year for about 5 years. So I've got quite a heartwarming love affair with Montana. Nevertheless, Montana has its issues with Native American discrimination, and I don't want to name any names here at all, but Sunshine, who's my wife, has a friend who is Native American descent. And she was. This how tragic is this? But we were in Denny's, and as you are in America, you've got to live it up to the extreme. And we were talking about this perspective, and she was telling me how certain names or preferences they would like to be discussed as natives and Native Indians or Native Americans. We're just talking about because it's important to educate oneself coming from a foreign country. Anyone who wants to understand the locals should always try and integrate themselves. Just ask questions, and people will be honest and tell you it. Nevertheless, she was telling me about being a very difficult place in Montana for that sort of things because you have it's a left-leaning state, but it's becoming quite right-wing in terms of what's happening in Los Angeles. People are coming up with a lot of money, eradicating even more culture than the eradication of culture was there. And then she was telling me about the Road of Tears in Canada, where 80 women a year of native origin are just gone. Even if they find bodies, they can't identify anyone. And we went to Forks, Washington, and she moved to Washington, and you go to reservations there, and there's no clean water. There's a systemic issue within this country about not giving just survivable conditions to people that they can even then become educated and stuff. It's a systemic issue that's still prevalent to that day. So I can completely understand the perspective of the people who watch this, who see themselves in the victims on screen. I can completely understand and sympathise in that waiting so long to have their story told, and another white man with another white leading man and another white leading man are then showcasing it into perspective of that. Again, we are the victims and not the victors in this association, and I completely sort of feel compelled to agree with that. The one thing I think this film misses, and I thought Scorsese was gearing it up to have another shift, is that once Molly gets on that train, and I'm just gonna say DiCaprio's character just nods at her. I really did think that was going to be then a different perspective that clash that the film would change then, and we would be in the POV essentially of Lily Gladstone's character, and the final arc would be hers. She could have the last, not with a bit of irony here. Forgive me, but almost a last laugh of sorts in the fact that she was the last one alive, and she got to see these people get sentenced. She got to see these people go down for these crimes. She survived long enough, of no fault of her own, of course. I think she's just unfortunately, as she perhaps see it, the lucky ones, in that she saw everybody taken away from her. I really did think that when she got on that train, we were going to have a gear shift of Lily Gladstone then takes centre stage, and it's her perspective, and she comes back and she sees that the FBI here. She sees this. The problem is that it then doubles down on her being a victim again with the insulin poisoning. Excuse me. And I really did think that it was a trick missed by Scorsese. I can understand the idea then to make it into a slightly more thriller-oriented feature, and the fact that once that knock happens with Jesse Plemons, the tone changes. And again, I think still got an hour to go then. But I really did think that was the time. Integrate Lily Gladstone as the main character, and let's see the fallout here in her perspective. Let's see her see the terror come to an end, or find some vindication, being able to move on. And the film never did it. And I granted, there's some conscious element of him wanting to strangle us even more, knowing that she never got that. And I do think that the idea was that we're always hoping for the actress, these people to get the vindication that they desperately so deserve, but it isn't coming. And I think and I know I'm jumping the gun here, but I think then it's immortalizing that last bit by Scorsese in the cameo. And I remember he says the one thing was like, she was buried. There was no comment about the deaths and the murders, and that's it. And that's ultimately what history has prevailed with these communities. I mean, I didn't know about Tulsa. I mean, granted, I'm not from that country, but I didn't know about Tulsa until a fucking Damien Lindelof program on HBO had to educate me on it. That's disparaging. That's horrific. I didn't know about this until Scorsese did it in 2023, almost 100 years after the fact. That's haunting. And I think that the fact that even to this day, there's still no vindication. The film is attempting to identify with that, and even in the last moments, being buried, there's still no mention of it. There's people still hiding secrets. Again, to reiterate, I still think that that's the idea to utilize, fair enough. But there were so many elements to just give that character the vindication, just for a little bit of a dopamine hit, just for the audience, but also a vindication for that community in knowing that we got these bastards. We didn't get all of them, but we got it. We got them sentenced. But then to do that little epilogue, to me, it was like interesting, but confused tonally to do so. I just think it's such a missed opportunity to give these people a little bit of a fucking up, And I think it was such a missed opportunity. And I do think it'll score the film. I do think that'll be the aspect where people will go, in 10 years' time, there'll be that argument. And I think you'll probably, in 5-6 years' time, go and say, like, yeah, we should have done more in that community. I think even he will agree with that. He just needed that moment, that vindication, and consciously or not, he didn't give them. But I just think it was totally correct to do so within how traumatizing this experience was.
Yeah, I think there's one line that William Hale has when he's in prison, where he's fully aware that he and everyone else, like even if they get sentenced, they're going to get away almost scot-free after like a few months, maybe a couple of years, which is exactly what happened. And he says that people are going to forget. This is just going to be another common tragedy. I think he said something along those lines. And he was right. And that's the frightening thing about it all. It was like he was right. Like people would rather forget than remember. Like, of course, when we say people, it's not the victims. Like the victims and all of those communities would never forget, but also the others are not really going to listen or believe them. And I think what I found so powerful and purposefully jarring about the epilogue with the radio show, not only is it kind of a change in style and tone and vibe, but it's entertainment. It's so fast and it's so exciting and fun, and there's the actors putting on their voices, and oh look, there's the Foley guy creating the sounds. It's entertainment, It's exactly that. It's like, oh, finally, some energy, some almost joy. Oh, what are we talking about? Oh, we're talking about murders, genocide, like a proper tragedy. And it's light and it's fun, and that's what happens, and that's what happened as well. Like, this story itself was turned into entertainment. There's like a couple of movies about the story of the FBI that also have like Tom White, and they just kind of, like, I think James Stewart played him in like 1959 or something. And yeah, they talk about the Osage, kind of like a throwaway element of a movie, but it's meant to be one of those, one of those dramas, like almost westerns. It's exciting, it's fun, and that's just what we keep on doing with just history, just repeating. It's always it's going to be entertainment. It's going to be fun for someone, and I think this is almost very similar to what, although in a much more condensed way, in just like 5-10 minutes maybe, of what he did with the ending of The Irishman. Because The Irishman is also a real story. The Irishman is also about another man who could have avoided a lot of murder, a lot of killing, a lot of evil, of putting it into the world, who kept on doing it just because. Why? We never really find out why he did it in The Irishman. He was a soulless man. Like, you get to the ending of The Irishman, and the man who killed Jimmy Hoffa was just soulless, or allegedly killed him. And so you get almost a similar thing with the ending of Killers of the Flower Moon, where it's like, yeah, all of this is just forgotten through time. It becomes entertainment for some, and the real people behind it go forgotten. But also, that's the ending of the movie. Like, we just witnessed a piece of entertainment. Now, entertainment not in the sense of fun, of just being enjoyable per se, but still like something that's meant to be consumed for, to pass the time, maybe. I don't know, however anyone like approaches art and cinema especially. But I think you watch all of
Consumer
this
is the
story.
thing, isn't it?
Yeah, like,
Consumerism,
you
yeah.
get to the end of it, and like, I think like that's the moment where you have to think, especially with Scorsese coming out. It's like, this was all real. Like, these were all real people, and I'm reminding you that. And they were completely forgotten from history. Like, if there wasn't the whole like David Grant book, like investigation going into it, like to this day, like you said, 100. I think he says at the end of the book, there's like maybe even over 200 people whose
Mhm.
murders were completely like not recognized as such. They were just like, oh, they just died throughout those weeks. It just happened, which is horrifying. Um, like, you can see, that really got to me. Like, you can see Scorsese almost like tearing up as he's reading the obituary of Molly, and that ties the entire film together. And the fact that that's not even the actual like final shot. It then transitions into, I think it's like the contemporary Osage community. If I might be
Mhm.
mistaken on that,
No,
but
you're
like
right.
with like dancing in the cycle, it's the cycle of life. It's just, I think there's still hope. There's still hope for a future. Like, we need stories like this. We don't need to shy away from the horror of the past, as brutal and as horrible as it is, especially like. And I do genuinely think I didn't really talk much earlier about representation in some sense, but thinking about it now, this is most definitely a movie meant for us, for the white people to witness, because it needs to be a reminder of just what happened before, what is still happening nowadays, not only in the actual context of reservations, but also on a larger scale. Like, we have a lot of those, a lot, like, yeah, I don't want to get political. We have this happening in a lot of countries, even in Europe, where it happened. Even in Italy, we have some sections where there's been entire villages slaughtered in the past for during fascism and things like that. Like, every single country has stories like this one. Everyone has had Killers of the Flower Moon, just kind of destroying entire communities for greed, because that's what it's all about in the end. It's the money. Yeah, I think I think without the epilogue, the movie works, but it doesn't have that extra punch. I think the epilogue is needed because of how different it is from everything that came beforehand.
Can I just?
Yeah.
I'm just going to come back at that. Right, I don't disagree with anything you've just said there, and I think the filmmaking skill there is personified by what you've just said. I'm not going to argue there. However, the intercontextuality of that scene to me is slightly tonally inaccurate, because why then put Jack White in a cameo? I just think that's a very strange idea to do that. And also, one filmmaker who I think perfectly embodied that last scene, did it a few years ago with Spike Lee and BlacKkKlansman, in that you have these KKK members organizing a hit, a bomb, and then he intercuts that with Harry Belafonte playing a civil rights activist in a black and white suit, sat round and has loads of African American kids and adults sitting around listening to him tell a story of when he went to the lynching. And what that sequence does is it completely takes you out. You're seeing the acts about this man terrorized as a child, watching a lynching happening a bit in front of his eyes. An element that people still want that to happen to that day contextually at the time, contemporary at the time anyway. And then it's intercut by people planning, by this low life KKK outfit wanting to blow up to a hit on black people. I think that personifies the idea of how to do that sequence, in that you bring a reality to it, you bring an earnest value to it, and remember that this shit's still going on, by then undercutting it by the cinematic things, the narrative surrounding it. This one's a little bit different because it's almost like an obituary, it's an epilogue. So I appreciate that. But to me, if you're going to do like an intercontextual aspect of it, also it's shot at Martin Scorsese Bronx High School as well, which I think was very interesting, to bring it back there to where he started, to give Molly a voice, or give more so the Osage a voice at the end, played by that director who's put that on his shoulders to give them a voice. I think it's quite an interesting and quite a poignant note. Alas, Jack White's there. It's then reiterated as a piece of entertainment value, which again contextually works of what you've just said about consumerism. Us having the only way to be educated by it is to be wanting to watch it at the cinema. I think that's quite a dark perspective on the audience. If I say so myself, how damning is that? The only way,
Or like
again,
even true crime podcasts, like it played
Yeah.
almost like
I
that.
was
Yeah.
thinking of that, but when I never thought about it until you started framing things that way. I was like, is that any different than like these Netflix series where they have
Serial,
about Jeffrey
yeah.
Dahmer and stuff, where it's like, oh look, it's so entertaining. It's like, no, it's not. It's bullshit. It's complete bullshit.
Yeah.
But I think he does. I think he realizes that. And I think that's, again, going back to what I said before about sort of twisting the audience into expecting something and then putting them into this perspective of having to witness these evil things. I think it's just the way slightly going forward with entertainment value, but also in a way trying to educate these people in the way that they will be. I think that's the perspective. The one thing I wanted to get into, and again, I think this is going to be quite controversial, but I think it deserves like a slight conversation about it. I know Carson sort of just winced then, so I do apologise. But reading up to this, right, I watched this probably the latest out of everybody, because I could not find a fucking screen to save my life. But I was reading about the Reservation Dogs star Devry Jacobs. I hope I'm not butchering that, but she's an actress. But I'll refer to they just because I'm not too sure how they identify. I don't want to misinterpret anything, but they said that they weren't a fan of The Kills of the Flower Moon. They had strong feelings, but they thought the film was painful, grueling, unrelenting, and unnecessarily graphic. Now, I went into this film knowing that quote, and I wanted to sort of examine that within the context of the film. And I do think that that's a perspective I have a lot of empathy for, undoubtedly, knowing about the sort of the road in Canada, the plight of this community. But I also think it's a very interesting conversation on graphicness and also perspective, because I see it from both values. If you are a victim in something, the one thing you don't want to see is a community that is being victimized once again for the idea of entertainment value. However, if you don't show the reality to people, people don't care. And we see this now in the news cycle. And that again, not to specify anything, but Nick said it as well. There's a lot of things happening now that people don't give a shit about because they don't have that perspective. They don't have the opportunity to see it. They're not seeing pictures of things that are happening in certain places in the world, and therefore, why bother? And I remember a few years ago, and again, please stay with me here because I don't want to go off a rant here, but I remember a lot of people were saying about children in the UK, about going homeless and going hungry and dying and stuff like that, and people were just horrified for it. And then on the beach, a Syrian refugee who was about 3 years old drowned. And it was in the national newspaper and nobody gave a fuck. And I think if you don't show that to people, they will never realise what other people are going through. And I think as grim as those things are, grim as that perspective is, I think if you don't show it in an honesty, in its vulnerability, I don't think people especially what's happening now with problems with inflation, putting food on the table. It's very hard to get through because people are so desensitized to modern media, and the fact that people can now pick and choose what they want to see. There's not two channels anymore. There's not just a Fox and NBC. There's a whole plethora of ideology on screen from whatever perspective, whatever religious backing you want to go to. Feel free to do it. I'm not anyone here to say any different. But I think that if you don't show these things as it is, nobody would believe it. And I'm not trying to I'm not trying to misconstrue this with what's happening now. But when people went to the camps in Auschwitz, they had to video it. They had to get documentary teams there because even they realized that nobody would believe those things were happening. And it's still true to this day in terms of there are people coming from North Africa, there are people coming from the Middle East in countries that my country have bombed and displaced, and they're wanting to be refugees and come over and to find a better way of living. And communities who accepted the fact that we were bombing them, who were all for it, have no intention of giving those people the time of day. And I think that these things on screen need to be seen because the people who did those things and the people who want to do those things and the people who are still doing those things need to be held accountable in the public eye, even if you can't name names. Once you identify and show it's happening, people will start to realize that this is terrorizing. And I'm not going to go political here, but my country has a very difficult relationship with the Muslim community. It's terrifying in a way that it's just the history of the racist abuse these people suffer from the hands of just like EDL members is frightening. And we're having a different perspective now in the UK with the armistice thing where people are going to go on marches for free Palestine. That's a difference in my country from 40 years because people are seeing certain atrocities that are happening in the Gaza Strip. But I think it's so poignant in the acceptance of once you show people terror and that people who don't get to go sleep in their bed at night with a 60-inch television and a blanket, and you see people bombed to oblivion, I think that perspective is imperative for people to be educated, and especially how modern media now is executed. It needs to be. So I truly appreciate the actress coming out with this. I can completely condone that thought process, but I think that there are certain American audiences who would have seen that film who would not have known that. Like me, I didn't know about the Osage crimes. I didn't know it, but I got to see that, and I got to see the absolute viciousness of it. And now I'm educated. I understand what that looked like. I understand what it looked like for those people. I understand what it looked like. I can't can say that I've never had that upon me, but I can understand it now. I can see the perspective. I'm educated. Perhaps if we showed that film to more people and we showed those atrocities in the way they were, I think that there's an interesting conversation to see how far you go. And a context is undoubtedly a thing that's conscious. It needs to be done in a certain way, not utilized in like a horror thriller, something like that, but to really showcase it's in its terror. I think it's really important. I don't know how anyone else feels. I don't mean to go very political. I know I go on, Carson. You indulge me. I do appreciate that because you love me to pieces. But I don't want to put anyone in any disparaging or make anyone feel uncomfortable about those conversations. But it's very interesting to see the flip side of it now when you look at perspective. So that's all I'd say on that. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in, but I just think it's important to show this. Otherwise, education, the future history is written by the victor, and these victors were not the Osage people, and that's the problem that it's been written by other people throughout. So I just think it's important to showcase this as hardcore as that. Again, that's my perspective. I'm not from that community, so read about the reservation actress, how she feels, or how they feel, sorry, and come to your own terms about it.
I think that's a pretty fair take to have, right? I mean, I would encourage everyone to go read that thread. I think it's a very engaging and very worthwhile thread that has a lot to say about the film. I respect that there's a difference of opinions and not one is right or wrong. I agree overall, it is very important to be explicit and to be clear and be visual about these things that are happening. Consistently, when you leave things up to interpretation, people are going to go with the quote unquote wrong answer. I would say, as someone who works in education, it is fucking terrifying to see how teenagers view Taxi Driver and view American Psycho and view just endless films. So for me, it's not an issue of that. I think that's where the film is at its strongest. I think that's where the film's at its most important. Again, I just wish it was more focused on that and that it didn't have my audience laughing throughout, but I don't know, that's just me. Does anyone have any other thoughts on Killers of the Flower Moon they
Ooh,
would like
I
to
do.
share?
I do.
Go for it.
And this is very important. I have to admit, like, I took like 3 pages of notes the second time I saw it, and I probably will be keeping them because I don't want to forget anything that I learned or observed. But there's one that I have to make, which is, and it kind of fits into the broader picture what we were just talking about. There's myth making. And as I guess in this case, we're talking about American myth making. And it does get turned into entertainment. It gets turned into books. It gets turned into podcasts. The ways that we learn about this stuff um, is usually outside of the classroom. It's sad that it has to be this way. But I think one of the things about this film that I do have to point out is how it's like American myth busting a little bit. It's like the fact that these people are not criminal masterminds. They're not. And it made me think about I did kind of do some more research into the Oklahoma City bombing that happened in the 90s, which also happened in
Oh
Oklahoma, the same
wow.
as the Osage murders. And the thing that's interesting is the whole myth that has kind of been built around the Oklahoma City bombing is like, look at these people, they're so evil. They were able to, get a bomb in and blow things up. But the more you look in, the more incompetent and crazy and potentially stupid these people are. And particularly with Timothy McVeigh, there's still, I don't want to say it's conspiracy theories, but there's still theories out there of unanswered questions
Yeah.
like this guy did not act alone.
Yeah, I've read
And
that, Hillary. Yeah, people don't believe that he could do it all on his own, so they
no,
have to
no,
accomplish him with someone else. I've read that. Yeah, it's very strange. Yeah.
absolutely. And with Killers of the Flower Moon, that definitely came back to me where it's like, okay, well, here you have a criminal mastermind played by Robert De Niro, but he just wants to keep his hands clean. So in order for you to do that, you do have to find easily manipulated people or people of lower intelligence or people who are desperate or easy to pressure or don't have a lot of choices in life to carry out these murders for you. Now, this happens several times throughout the film, and we see these, just the hierarchy that's built is that these people are questionable as far as their intelligence. I mean, if I'm putting it nicely. And then, of course, everything kind of folds and they all end up like ratting each other out during this investigation, which kind of sets the precedent of, how the FBI ends up investigating things, how our justice system ends up working, which is not necessarily about justice, it's about deal making. Um, so I think that although this movie, the way it's viewed, I think Carson brought up a very, very good point. Although teenagers, seriously, the thing that I take some comfort in is like the way things are viewed as a teenager, it probably will evolve as they get older, crossing my fingers. And who knows how this film is going to be viewed years from now. It might just be considered long and boring by young people, or people might see it and see it from a different point of view, good or bad, later on. But overall, I feel like that's a part of the film that I can't discount, is that these people are stupid. They're not subtle. They blow up a fucking house. They blow up a house. That's like the most unsubtle way to murder somebody. It's like, how else are you going to explain that? Um, just like how flagrant it was. Um, and that these people are idiots. So I'm going to kind of end on that note. Criminals, just because someone gets away with a crime doesn't mean there's a criminal genius, behind everything. A lot of it has to do with incompetence, a lot of it has to do with privilege, and a lot of it has to do with money. And can't forget that, especially in the aftermath of everything that happens here. It's not fair. It hurts, but it needs to be seen.
Yeah, I also agree with that. I think another aspect of that is where they kill Robert De Niro's bodyguard, and they try. Why didn't you make it look like a suicide? Why did you shoot him in the back of the head? I didn't know. I told him that I didn't know, and it's like the level of incompetency and the fact that like then he keeps the gun. And I think it's always that thing about the human nature and the fact that we all believe that we want to know. There's got to be a reason for something more so than the obvious. I think it's the fact that like it's like what is the meaning of life, and everyone comes up with these arbitrary like fucking reasons of just like, oh, we're doing this and doing that, when really there's no real reason. It's just it is what it is, and as blunt as that is. But going back to the point, I think that we're always looking for these bigger motifs, like Hillary said it in the thing about the Oklahoma bombing. We're always looking for, it can't be that simple, it can't be that simple, but it is. The tragedy of this story is that they did it for greed, they did it for dollars, they did it for jewelry, they did it to make money. There's nothing else on the planet that made them. There's no other. They didn't wake up one day and decide that I'm going to do this. It's the fact that the greed took over, and the greed became plausibility, and then it became a reality. That's the tragedy. It's a human nature. There's nothing that no one came down. No one told them to do it by an alien, or not. Jesus Christ himself didn't come down and educate them on the fact that you should do this. You should wipe the Osage out. They did it because they could, but for greed. Terrifying. I mean, when you break it down like that, I think it just exemplifies the terror about this, that these are human people who murdered other people. Again, it's what Hillary said again. Like, Hillary's been bang on the whole podcast, but again, just to say that about you said earlier about like my train of thought gone, but the simplicity and the fact that, you know, if you're compelled to do something, the human nature, it will do it. You know, it'll push that boundary of what you know is right and wrong, and we question ourselves why, but they'll do it in circumstances. And I think here it's exemplified, not exemplified, but exemplified, sorry, in the fact that you look at these characters and you think, there's got to be another reason. That's the tragedy of these human beings took other human beings' life for paper. Like that, they wiped out a culture of people, a small systemic genocide to make money. Like, if that's not something that's as you get older, I think as well, not to call people immature of a younger audience, but I do think it's when you get older and you get life under your belt a little bit, and you see people break your heart or lie to you, and you get older, and you understand that when you start doing that a little bit to people, you take that whimsical nature out of it, and you can slightly understand it. But it's one of those things where people do things, and it's sort of human nature, and we can understand that. But then it's like the next step too far about killing people for money. I mean, that doesn't cross my mind. I don't know, but I hope no one else, like, but you know, but it's one of those things where it makes sort of even more human, which is like, whew, terrifying. I mean, but that's human history. You look at everything now, and it's like that as well. It's just terrifying to watch. But I think it's mostly exemplified here. I just want to end on one thing, and I'm going to do it for Alina Folds as well. Old ClapperCast OG. This is Robbie Robertson's last score. He died 2 months later from the band, and I know that she'd want this mentioned. But I think the score is outstanding. A Scorsese friend. He did. If anyone wants to go watch The Last Waltz, go do it. Watching them do the tour. But I think Robbie Robertson here does an outstanding job of a score on screen, and for his last effort to do it with his friend for a collaboration, especially that this film is honest about morality. Are we going to see another Scorsese film in the future? I hope so. Will we see another one with Robert De Niro? I don't think so. Time is now not on these people's side, which is horrifying. This film morality extends further more than its narrative, but to its producing partners, to its co-stars, to its cinematic prowess. So there's a lot here about morality, and for Robbie Robertson to have passed away, being a friend for 40 years to Scorsese is haunting. And you know, he did a piece with Timothy Chalamet about, you know, or maybe it was with The Guardian, I can't remember, but about randomly did it with Timothy Chalamet, but he did do an interview with him. He's like, you know, I tried to meet up with those people, the ones who are left, and that's just, it's terrifying to. It's all going to hit us one day, but you know, time is not on these people's side. But yeah, to see Robert Robertson score, I hope it gets some acclaim in February. I really do. I think it will do. He'll definitely be nominated, but it's such a wonderful thing, and it's community backed and based as well, which is another a nice little homage to the Osage people. But yeah, just wanted to mention that just for Alina Folds, the OG.
Yeah, I was gonna say that as well. Like, this soundtrack is incredible, especially in the opening scene with which is such a delightful opening. I think when you have the Osage just discovering the oil, and then you have the montage of like actual archival footage mixed with fake archival footage, like the actors in the costumes and everything. I think it paints in like 5 minutes. 10 minutes tops, like it paints a very clear picture of what happened there and how they got rich and how they got power that very, very slowly and in a very insidious way was taken away from them before the actual killing started. Yeah, no, it was incredible.
Before we go, I also want to mention 2 performances I don't think got a lot of love on this episode. The first is Eli the Owl, as you mentioned, Nick, in his debut feature role. Great. And then secondly, Brendan Fraser. I know there's been a lot of debate around his role here. I thought he was excellent. He has like 2 scenes, the power he brings and how he just sucks the air in the room and puts it all on him. Obviously, it's the point of his character narratively as the lawyer, but like I thought he was stunning here. I really, really like Fraser. So I don't know. A lot of people are like, he sucks here. So I don't know if anyone disagrees, but I really appreciated him.
I
I
didn't
loved him.
understand that. Yeah, I didn't understand that negative because we were recording a ClapperCast episode where it was said that he was cut out of the film because it was coming at 2:10 minutes, and then a few months later we did Oppenheimer and Barbie, and Max said that Max Sand said it was back in, and then it was all like really interesting comments about like it's controversial. I didn't see much of it. There's definitely Scorsese made mention of like there's girth there. It is a fucking Orson Welles-esque performance of taking the screen up, and that's why it's there. I mean, I don't necessarily understand the controversy aside from perhaps it being using the motif of a larger gentleman, but in that way, I think it intoxicates the screen, especially winning an Academy Award. I mean, fuck anyone else. Brendan Fraser's living the dream now. I've got all more power to him from his story. But yeah, I didn't get that. I didn't understand that either, and I thought John Lithgow was good as well, Carson. I thought he had a bit of a he had like three scenes. He was quite good. I thought Jesse Plemons was very good. I thought the Howl did a very good job. Yeah, I thought everything was pretty good. I did think that Scorsese's ending his cameo was interesting as well. Very much a choice because that could have if that was someone else rhyming with Arantina, I think that would have been quite a difficult thing for me to accept. But I think to choose yourself to do that is like, ooh. Interesting. I'd be very interesting to talk about Academy Award. I know you hate this, but I can't see this in a world where Lily Gladstone will be nominated. I think De Niro will nominate and win, but I think DiCaprio here is like, I think he's good, but like Hillary said, like I sort of accustomed to play him play these villains type and knowing the direction he's going to take. So I don't feel it revolutionary or a revelation. I don't know how you guys felt, but for me it was just like, I don't know. It felt like just I don't know. The momentum was like, oh okay. It sort of felt predictable to me, but I thought everyone else was. I think De Niro was like terrifying in this.
I mean, I don't really see a world where this isn't nominated in like most categories. I think obviously Gladstone is getting there for Best Actress. Leo is probably pretty safe. Robert, I would appreciate him getting in. I don't know if it will happen, but like I think as far as like technicals, picture, director, I think that's all pretty safe.
I think costume and makeup it'll win. I think that the Academy loves that sort of stuff, doesn't it? Then again, Oppenheimer. Then again, Barbie. Tough one.
Yeah.
Yeah, dear.
Well, I think that's going to wrap up our conversation on Killers of the Flower Moon. You can see the film in theaters, and in the future, it'll be on Apple TV Plus. I don't believe we have a date for that, but it will be there. I would recommend, though, if you're going to see the film, just go to the theater. I think with most 3-hour productions, probably I'm going to say the same thing in 2 weeks about Napoleon. It's probably worth seeing on the big screen. So, I mean, we'll see. Let's go to our question of the week because it does tie into Scorsese. We're asking, what is your favorite Martin Scorsese film? Hillary, why don't you kick us off? What is your favorite Scorsese feature?
Oh God, that's actually really a hard one. You know,
that's
yeah,
easy,
I was not prepared. Yeah, that's a hard one. But the one that immediately comes to mind as far as the one that I definitely own in my collection is The Departed, which I know some people will probably be like, "Boo, late Scorsese. What about the early Scorsese?" And there's a lot of wonderful stuff there too. But in order for me to be frank and completely honest, that's the one that I have. So maybe that's my favorite. I'm not entirely sure, but I have to answer at the top of my head, and that's the answer I'm giving.
Love it. Nick, what is your favorite?
I was struggling to think about it, and I have a tie. I know it's cheating a bit, but I love to. It's Scorsese, man. It's Marty. It's Marty. I cannot pick just one, but one is The Age of Innocence. Absolutely love that film. Some people say it's the least Scorsese movie. I completely disagree. It's full of everything that Scorsese loves, and I think it's just an incredible adaptation. And the second one has to be The Irishman. I've seen it like 4 times, and my favorite viewing of it was in uni. I think it was maybe the second or the third time watching it with a friend of mine. It was like almost midnight when we started playing it. We were in the common kitchen with the automatic lights, where they just like turn off after half an hour. And I kid you not, like We were watching the movie, like getting something to drink and whatnot. You move a little bit in your seat. We get to the final scene of the movie, shot of the corridor with De Niro. It cuts to black and the light turned off. We were completely still for half an hour, and the timing of it was fucking perfect. We stood still for the entire end credits because it was just the magic of it. I love that film to bits. I know it's one of the most recent ones. So, like you said, Hillary's like, you're a taxi driver, you have Alice, you have every. It's like Irishman just gets me on a level that very few films do. So,
I'll just pop in quickly and say I agree about The Irishman. That is my favorite one. Um, Stunning feature. I mean, so much depth there and so much weight of time. I think that's a film, if you want to talk about like a 3.5 hour runtime being deserved, you can't have that film without that runtime. And by the end, you just feel everything you've seen just compressing down upon you. I remember afterwards, I got home from my screening. It was part of a film festival. And I was like, actually, I just need to walk around the block quickly and just like take it in. Because, you get amped up. It's like after you go on like a really great Disneyland ride or whatever, you're like, you know what? Fuck yeah. Cinema actually is great. I love it. It is awesome. And Jack, what would be your favorite Scorsese film?
Like Hillary and probably like Nick have said, this is brutal to do. But I have three. I'm going to give three different answers. I do apologize. I'll be very quick. But one of my favourites, underrated, is The Aviator. I absolutely adore it. It's one of my first Scorsese films where it really sort of indulged in his creative endeavours. I love The Aviator. DiCaprio's way too young to play that role. He should be doing it now. But it's amazing. I can't believe he got it made, especially Gangs of New York 2 years after. My favourite of all time, anyone knows me, I fucking love Casino. Joe Pesci and De Niro just in a desert shouting at each other. And Nutter James Woods, Sharon Stone on coke, the wardrobes in that film, the soundtrack, Don Riggles as well. It's amazing. But I'm going to go a little bit left field into it. I think one of my favourites, and I've only seen it once, is Italian American, that he made in the same year as he made Mean Streets, where he talks about it with his mom, Catherine Scorsese. What an absolute, honestly, what a diamond she is. She reminds me of my own grandma. Like, she's just so lovely. Like, he sat with his mom and dad talking about the other old country making spaghetti. It's so euphoric. It's so relentlessly fun, and it's so entertaining. And it's only 50 minutes long. I could watch it for the rest of my life. But those are my top. I can't do one, so those are my three. But Casino's the best. Fucking Joe Pesci.
That's actually the best answer you could give to this question. I didn't even think about it, but like that is such a good answer.
It's so good.
Now let's go to our rapid reviews. I'm going to start quickly, and I'm going to go very quickly through this list because it's endless. Poor Things, me and Nick are recording a podcast on it. All I will say, it's really, really, really good. The Marvels was fun, though there is an entire segment to Memory from Cats, which, I mean, I'm going to like, sorry. Sofia Coppola's Priscilla, I thought was good, important. I wish he spent a little bit more time developing the story and perspective to be a little bit more holistic and wide than what it actually ends up being. I think making it so quickly as a reaction piece to Elvis was probably a mistake, but it was fine. Naiad on Netflix, the debut narrative feature of the people who made like Free Solo, that documentary pair. I thought it was fine. Annette Bening is fantastic in it. Unintentionally funny though, because they're not great filmmakers. Sorry. Five Nights at Freddy's is a complete mess. I went to AFI Fest. The biggest film I saw there was Freud's Last Session, the new Anthony Hopkins film where he plays Freud and debates religion. Very boring, very bad. But my biggest thing I'm going to say, and this is not a film, it's kind of a recommendation. If anyone goes to LA, please, and you like film in any capacity, go to the Academy Museum. I was stunned by this museum, and obviously I thought I was going to like it. It goes way beyond anything having to do with the Oscars. It's this wonderful holistic look at filmmaking and even like things before filmmaking that eventually like led to the ideals of putting pictures together and telling narrative stories from them. Such a diverse array of objects and exhibits that were so well put together. I also was like very lucky when I went because it was an exhibit on Varda, an exhibit on John Waters, and an exhibit on oh my gosh, why Pedro? No, what's his name? Oh
Yeah.
God.
Almodovar?
Yes,
Yeah,
Almodovar.
okay.
Sorry, I'm going quickly. And literally in the Almodovar segment, I started like crying. I don't know why. Like, it was so powerful just being surrounded by like this queer perspective on film authentically, where I just started like literally crying in there. It really was a fantastic experience. If you are a fan of film, please make time to go to the Academy Museum. It's only like 3 hours to get through the entire thing, and it really was a stunning experience. With that, that's my segment done. Thank God. Jack, what have you seen recently?
Oh, I've seen some shit. I watched Sunset. Blake Edwards as Bruce Willis and James Garner film. I thought it was terrible. I've been finishing my Universal Monster movies, which have got diminishingly worst. I did watch Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Charisma after watching Cure not so long ago. I enjoyed that. I'm going to try watch Creepy soon. I watched a lot of James Cagney, G-Man. James Cagney, I read up about him. One of the main proponents of going against the system, Warner Brothers, Screen Guilders Act. The quotations of being the cinema needs you. They need you up on stage, so let them need you. I think it's really important now, considering what's happening. I watched the documentary Sly, boring, underwhelming. I watched Ballerina on Netflix. I think it was fine. I watched Polite Society, which I thought was really good fun. I went on a Stallone binge. I watched Tango and Cash, which I enjoyed for half of it, and the other half was boring. I watched Detox with Stallone as well, which I thought was actually quite fine. I think it was okay. It was quite strange. I watched some Fritz Lang with Fury. I got back on the Johnny Toe stuff. I watched The Mission. I watched Running Out of Time 2. The Mission is outstanding. The theme tune in that is so good. Running Out of Time 2 was okay. And I watched one of my favourite of all time films, which is Amir Kusturica's Black Cat, White Cat. If you're ever going to watch a Romani gypsy type of a film about how the other half lives for 2 hours, watch that. It's incredible. I know that maybe someone in this recording doesn't like it, but it just reminds me of being watching it at college. I watched two other films I don't want to mention because they're somewhat political, but just I just wanted to understand who these people were. Bob Fosse's season for Uncut Gems has taken over. Watched some of that. Black Christmas. I watched *Malignant* again. I watched *The Conspirator*, Kenneth Branagh and Stanley Tucci, and I watched *Reality* with Sydney Sweeney, and that's generally everything I've seen. Mixed results. Good stuff.
Man, you're not watching a lot of films anymore. That's kind of sad.
It's kind of crazy. I am watching The Killer tonight. Fassbender, Da Vinci. I'm gonna watch Miss Marvel, the Marvels tomorrow. So cinema is back. James Cagney to Brie Larson in an outfit, playing a wizard or something in space. Can't wait. Living the dream.
Nick, what have you seen recently?
I'll be super quick. Been going through the filmography of Terrence Davies because he passed away last month. Very untimely passing. And I absolutely loved his early trilogy of short films, especially Madonna and Child. We'll talk about like queer cinema a lot. Definitely watch his films, Carson, especially like this trilogy. I think is on Criterion Channel. Well worth seeking out. Also queer cinema, queer TV. Watching Chucky season 4. Slowish first 2 episodes, but the third one was excellent. So I'm excited for the last one. And then there's
season
like part
4?
2 coming out very soon. Oh, is it season 3? Maybe
it's season 3.
Oh, he's not even a fan. Look, he's not even a fan. So, and he's messaging he's messaging Bride of Chucky was released this time in the group chat on Twitter. Stop it! You're not a fan of it. You didn't even get it right.
It's almost 10 p.m. You know, I've been awake since 6-8 a.m. Bear with me.
Be easy on him.
Be easy on me. And last thing, I did watch The Killer today. Really enjoyed it, way more than I thought I would. I thought it was very funny character study. Of just I think it, as I tweeted, it will make for an excellent double feature with Killing Them Softly. You know, the Andrew Dominic film, because it's like criminals and capitalism, and it's all about the money, and they lack empathy. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was better than I expected. I'm not a David Fincher fan, even though I enjoy most of his films. I wouldn't consider myself a fan where I'm like, oh, what, new David Fincher? Like, I'm not like that. I'm just like, oh yeah, The Killer. I'll watch it. People in Venice were lukewarm. I was like, damn, this actually very solid. And I'll say it's very close in terms of style, look, and tone to a film I would like to do. It's like an adaptation of a French novel that I really like. That's also like about a female hitman in that case. It's called Fatale by Jean-Patrick Manchette, if you want to seek it out. So it's good. Good stuff. I'm not watching much. I'm still editing my short film.
Oh,
that's fine.
Good luck.
I think
with
Tilda Swinton should be in Best Supporting Actress conversation for The Killer. She's fantastic in that film. Hillary, what have you seen recently?
Well, I've seen a lot, and I kind of went through everything I've been watching, and there's nothing really worth. I felt like passionate enough to plug, so I ended up just coming up with a list of films by Native Indigenous filmmakers that I think people should check out in the wake of seeing Killers of the Flower Moon. I also wanted to bring up that I was raised with Robbie Robertson's music, and if you want to hear his most Native American influenced stuff, I would get music from the Native Americans, which is a score he made for a documentary years back. I was raised with that, and the music in that is fantastic. It features a lot of different Native artists as well as his band. But as far as recommendations, please see more Native and Indigenous cinema. It's so accessible, it's out there. Tantu Cardinal, who played Molly's mother, she's a lead in a film called Falls Around Her that is streaming. See the late Jeff Barnaby films like Rhymes for Young Ghouls. See Blood Quantum. There are other movies out there. There's Beans, Wild Indian, Night Raiders, Catch the Fair One. There's other films made by outsiders that are still worth seeing, like Chloe Zhao's Songs My Brother Taught Me and The Writer. I would even say Prey is worth a shot. War Pony is worth a shot. And of course, like, I can't recommend this enough because we did talk about Devery Jacobs earlier. Please watch Reservation Dogs. I can't recommend that enough. And it's one of my favorite television shows that's come out in quite a long time. I tell everyone to watch that. And we haven't plugged our social media yet. I will put a list up of all of these things that I mentioned, except for Reservation Dogs, of course, because I know that rewinding a podcast over and over again, if you want to make a note of all these things, can be kind of overwhelming.
Absolutely. So with that, let's plug our social media. Hillary, you might as well just take it away. Where can we find that list?
Yes. Actually, I kind of reformatted all my social media, my plug. I mean, and my blog, all that sort of stuff. It used to be under Laudanum at 33, but I kicked the name out because, I just don't want everyone thinking I'm a drug addict. Although that's had nothing to do with it was just a random phrase I picked up. So everything's been reformatted. You could find me at Letterboxd at Degelle, which is a maiden name in my family. It's spelled Degelle at Letterboxd. The list will be there, and there should be a campsite like Linktree bio thing you can click on, and that'll take you to everywhere else I am on the internet.
Love it. Nick, where we can find you?
Twitter and Instagram at NickyGro97, also on Letterboxd Nicolò Grasso, and YouTube and Vimeo. Enjoy the movies, all the good stuff.
And we can still support your short film, right?
Yeah, post-production is getting close to the end, but I got the first draft of a painted poster for my short film, and I'm excited for people to see the final one because I love my painted posters supporting artists. Yeah, I'm happy that everyone's getting supported on this project. No one worked for free the way it should be, and they all ate well during filming. We still talk about it a month later. But yes, be on the lookout for more news on that, on Phantom Touch.
You doing what mainstream Hollywood can't do. Jack, where can we find you? Right.
I just want to say, Hillary, if anyone follows Hillary on Letterboxd, Hillary watches the most strangest, random of things. It's always really worth looking at the history of reviews on there, or just logged, because I'll just find a random film at like 2.1 out of 5, and no one's seen it. But then there's a 1.5 star review of Hillary. I'm always fascinated. So do follow everyone here because everyone's got such an interesting opinion. You can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd with the username at Jak-Luke, and you can find ramblings of reviews and features on clapperltd.co.uk. I'm going to bring out 2 Matrix ones. I missed the Matrix Revolutions date like by a week ago, and I'm actually a broken heart, but I was busy. But yeah, I'm going to do 2 features. Shut up! I'm going to do 2 features on them. And then yeah, just to celebrate, but yeah, just to get a trans conversation up on the website, which I think would be brilliant, especially for the Wachowskis as well. Which 2 trans filmmakers we need to see more. But like Hillary said, support Native American media as much as you can. I think this film is very important. Just support minorities, support people who don't have voices, and you'll find that their media is very interesting, very important.
Absolutely. And you can find me on Twitter at BP_movie reviews, Letterboxd just Carson Tamar. Thank you so much for listening. It's a very exciting few months for the podcast. I hope everyone enjoys the new cover art and the new kind of presentation style. And then also we have a bunch of new episodes. Not only do we do our normal episodes every other week, but over the next few months, we have a few bonus episodes starting next week where me and Jack are going to look at the new Hunger Games film. We have a Ferrari review coming eventually. We have our Poor Things review, which is going to be a bonus one. So a lot of fun stuff happening on the show. And I can't wait for you to hear it. So thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week. Goodbye.